tonight. As the IDF works to rid Gaza of terrorists, there's growing concern in northern Israel.
Hamas is a piece of cake compared to Hezbollah.
The latest on tensions in the Middle East. Plus, with questions over President Biden's health dominating headlines. Today, he kicks off hosting NATO leaders in the nation's capital.
They constantly talk to him everywhere he goes about how important what he's been doing is, not just to the alliance, but to our partnerships around the world.
And the GOP plays out its new stance on abortion. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Israel and Hezbollah are teetering on the edge of full-scale war. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. From CBN's headquarters in Virginia Beach, I'm Brody Carter. Israeli troops are pushing deeper into Gaza City tonight, hunting down Hamas terrorists who regrouped after being driven out months earlier. Palestinian families are fleeing as both sides wage fierce gun battles, while Israeli fighters, they take on Hamas in the south. Tensions simmer in the north. Today, Hezbollah released new drone footage of sensitive Israeli military sites. Hours later, another barrage of rockets shook Israel. Now, the enemies have traded artillery fire nearly every day for a month. According to Reuters, Israeli strikes have killed more than 330 Hezbollah fighters and around 90 civilians in Lebanon. Israel says attacks from Lebanon have killed 21 soldiers and 10 civilians.
We need to think about Hezbollah as the ground troops of Iran in the northern border of Israel. That's the only way to think about it. They're funded, supported, and trained by Iran.
Meanwhile, negotiations to secure a Gaza ceasefire and hostage deal are expected to resume tomorrow in Qatar. More than 100 hostages remain in captivity. Still unclear how many are still alive. Here in the U.S., with so much attention on anti-Semitism across college campuses, Congress is now expanding its focus to include the workplace. As CBN's John Jessup explains, it's an ongoing effort to address a national rise in anti-Semitism.
Those incidents jumped 360% after the October 7th attack and war in Gaza. With documented anti-Semitic examples in schools, synagogues, and the workplace, lawmakers have turned their attention to labor and student unions. While scenes like these may no longer be plastered across our screens, anti-Semitism has not retreated, leading Democrats to join Republicans in condemning violence against Jews.
I want to be very clear that anti-Semitism has no place in any workplace, in any school, in any union, or any other facet of American life.
Discussion then quickly diverged on the goal of this hearing.
For some reason, many union leaders would rather double down on defending a terrorist organization than focus on local workers' issues.
Democrats defending the overall influence of unions.
From the civil rights movement to marriage equality and protections for undocumented workers, unions have been on the forefront of social and socioeconomic progress.
And Republicans questioning whether they've engaged in partisan politics and, in this case, promoting anti-Semitic conduct among members who pay dues to be a part of those unions. Tuesday's hearing featured personal accounts of anti-Semitism from Jews who say their unions left them feeling coerced and threatened.
It is heartbreaking for me as a Jewish American and as a Zionist to have my phone ringing off the hook every single day since October 7th by students, workers, teachers, legal aid lawyers, doctors saying, how do I get out of this?
I've tried to use the law as it exists, and at every turn, the law has failed me.
One witness summarized her goal for Tuesday's testimony.
I'm not here to weaken the union, but to strengthen it. The union is tearing itself apart.
And while critics argue these hearings and recent congressional subpoenas are a backdoor way of targeting unions, supporters say they'll continue to root out anti-Semitism any place it exists. John Jessup, CBN News, Washington.
The NATO Summit is in full swing in Washington, D.C. Leaders from 32 member countries are gathered there to mark the alliance's 75th anniversary at our nation's capital. They'll discuss a range of critical issues, including more support for Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reiterated NATO's support for Kyiv, announcing $7 million in private funding for female soldiers on the front lines.
Right now, there are thousands of Ukrainian women who are serving on the front lines, literally as snipers, as machine gunners, as medevac pilots, commanding tank units and artillery batteries. Every day, they prove that valor has no gender.
The discussions will also touch on NATO's nuclear deterrence policy and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific. And with that, let's bring in Ivana Stradner. Ivana is a research fellow and NATO expert at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Ivana, thank you so much for being here. I do want to start where we finished off here prior to the beginning of the show. You had said how this alliance is truly at risk. Let's begin there.
Indeed, the alliance is truly at risk, even though that this is the 75th anniversary, and we see how NATO actually grew for 2 new members recently. The alliance is indeed at risk. First of all, the threat coming from Russia, because Vladimir Putin has been candid about his desire to dismantle the alliance. And let me be clear, even though Putin is not performing perfectly in Ukraine, and his tanks and jets may not be powerful or more powerful than NATO's tanks and jets, he does not need to use those hard power tools to dismantle the alliance. Recently, the Baltic states actually warned that Putin also has a desire to challenge NATO in the Baltics. Poland is also very concerned. We have other NATO member states in the Balkans, such as Montenegro and North Macedonia. So Putin has numerous ways how he can actually show that the alliance is a paper tiger. Let's not forget that Putin is not a military guy. He's a KGB guy. He's in intelligence. So he actually prefers to exploit every vulnerability coming from his adversaries. And NATO does have indeed its vulnerabilities that Putin is willing to exploit through information operations, through hybrid warfare activities, through sabotage. Everything that is below the Article 5 and below the threshold of war, so he does not need to trigger Article 5. Yet, those powerful tools can be powerful enough actually to show that NATO is a paper tiger. And this is precisely why I truly hope that this week NATO is going to spend considerable time talking about hybrid threats. But it's not only Russia, it's also the threat coming from China, because the alliance also has an obligation to deter further aggression. And that's also, on the agenda. And as you mentioned, nuclear capabilities. When it comes to nuclear capabilities, it is also the question of Iran developing nuclear weapons, but also the question of Putin's recent nuclear threats. And Putin's nuclear threats, it's the part of his psychological warfare game that he's actually targeting specifically the Western leaders for them to stop supporting Ukraine. Unfortunately, Putin only understands the language of power, and for him, weakness emboldens him. So it's really high time for the 75th anniversary of NATO that the alliance put its act together to speak in one voice and to make sure that they perceive the war in Ukraine through Putin's lenses, because this war, it's not only about Ukraine. This is an ideological war that Putin has been waging with China, with Iran, with North Korea, democracy versus autocracy. And until
Ivana, that was very well said, and I don't want to intrude too far. We just have time for one more question here, and I want to get this in. NATO expanded under the Biden administration, adding Sweden and Finland. The president has made references to Trump-proofing the NATO alliance. How could a Trump presidency potentially change NATO as we know it today?
So Trump was also, candid about his views on NATO and called it obsolete. He said at some point, he challenged certain countries who are below the threshold of 2% of their respective GDP and question, he would be willing to defend them. I think it's too early right now to talk about this, but make no mistake, whoever wins in November, countries such as China and Russia are going to and be willing to challenge NATO, because right now, as we are talking, there is also on the border with Poland, Belarus, and China are also having something that is called like a anti-terrorist, exercises.
Okay.
So be very careful.
Ivana Stradner, I appreciate your time, your expertise, and your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, two key figures shaping U.S. financial policy were questioned on Capitol Hill today. The main focus for most Americans is what Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell had to say about inflation. In a separate session, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was asked to address concerns about the president's mental acuity, even though she was there to discuss international finance. Our senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener breaks it all down.
Well, financial testimony before Congress can include a lot of statistics. Senators focused mainly on issues that matter to Americans, especially as the November election gets closer. The major questions dealt with high prices, interest rates, and paychecks not keeping up with inflation.
Recent indicators suggest that the U.S. economy continues to expand at a solid pace.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell told the Senate Banking Committee that measures taken by the Fed have made considerable progress in defeating the worst inflation spike in 40 years.
Inflation has eased notably over the past couple of years, but remains above the Federal Open Market Committee's longer-run goal of 2%.
Continued high inflation and what Powell calls a cooling but strong labor market remain key concerns.
Everyday families are struggling to put food on the table. Real wage growth is being eaten away by rising prices and runaway inflation.
Between March 2022 and July 2023, the Fed raised interest rates 11 times, reaching 5.3% in an effort to combat inflation. Although Powell hinted that the central bank is inching closer to a long-awaited interest rate cut, he did not provide a timeline.
I'm concerned a bit that we're not on a very faster track to decreasing interest rates.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen appeared optimistic in the International Financial System's annual report. With inflation a major concern as elections approach, Yellen is hopeful it will reach the Fed's 2% target by 2025.
Inflation is coming down. The measure the Fed focuses on is now running at 2.6% over the last year, and I believe that it will continue to come down.
Yellen also fielded questions from Republican lawmakers on whether she had seen any evidence of mental decline in President Biden.
The president is extremely effective in the meetings that I've been in with him. That includes many international meetings that are multi-hour, like his meetings with President Xi.
Yellen also testified that she's not aware of any cabinet discussions regarding the 25th Amendment, which would enable the vice president and cabinet members to declare the president unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office and transfer the job to the vice president. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Coming up, the GOP shifts its stance on abortion. Reaction from pro-life activists when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. The Republican Party is changing its stance on abortion to reflect former President Trump's position. Language approved for the party's new platform drops the push for a federal ban for the first time in 40 years. The platform cites the 14th Amendment's guarantee that no person can be denied life or liberty without due process of the law. While some pro-life groups affirm the move came as a shock, as a commitment to protect life, Family Research Council President Tony Perkins had said it doesn't go far enough. Perkins, who's also a GOP delegate, plans to submit a minority report calling for a human life amendment. And joining us to further this conversation is Travis Weber, Vice President for Policy and Government Affairs at the Family Research Council. Thank you so much for joining us, Travis.
Thanks for having me on.
Travis, you were in that committee hearing when the RNC adopted this new platform. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are two issues at hand here. One is obviously the language itself, which is disappointing in that it departs from the strong pro-life position that the Republican Party and the Life Coalition as a whole had taken for decades. But perhaps even more concerning was the manner in which this happened yesterday and this decision was reached. The tactics and heavy-handed approach that was taken during the platform committee meeting yesterday was very disturbing. And so I think that's adding unnecessary fuel to the fire, regardless of the actual end, the end game of the language itself.
Well, Travis, what do you think are the former president's strategic reasons for making this shift in abortion policies? And how do you see this affecting support from his Republican base?
Yeah, so I think he's certainly looking at election victory. It's understandable. Everyone's focused on November. And what happened yesterday in terms of the process and the platform language was driven towards achieving an outcome in with which the president was satisfied. President Trump seemed to be very involved in that process. Unfortunately, the party platform is much broader than just any one president or any one election. And so in the effort to focus on November, folks were alienated yesterday because when they should have been included at the table and included in the discussion, they were not. And they were steamrolled, and that was very apparent for anyone observing what happened yesterday. So I think this is an unforced error. It's unfortunate. It was not necessary because there was no one there yesterday who is opposing President Trump. What's happening is there are concerns about some of the pro-life language that people just cannot go along with. But in the effort to focus on election victory, those people have been steamrolled. And now, it remains to be seen how they will respond in November. I think, unfortunately, there are going to be some folks who have been enthused by what President Trump has done on the life issue, and that's why they turned out in 2016. We don't know if they're going to turn out this year. It's yet to be seen, and I think it was a real unnecessary set of steps that took place yesterday in terms of how the language was finalized and the language itself.
So regarding that language, what do you think the platform should say?
Yeah, so the platform language that was reached yesterday mentions the 14th Amendment, but it does not explicitly note that the unborn are protected by the 14th Amendment. That's something that has been in the platform since 1976. In addition, mention of the Human Life Amendment was cut. That's been in the platform since 1976. The current platform also does not mention no taxpayer funding for abortion. If at any time American taxpayers should be concerned about this, it's now. No one wants their tax dollars, no one should want their tax dollars going to fund elective abortions. And yet there was an opportunity to call attention to that. That was missed yesterday. That issue was taken out of the platform when it's been in prior platforms. So I think the weakening of the stance is what's concerning. Tony Perkins has submitted a minority report calling attention to that. But, beyond this, the way in which this happened was really disturbing yesterday, and it was really unnecessary.
Travis, unfortunately, that's all the time we have there, but thank you so much for your expertise and your insights.
Thank you.
Still ahead here on Faith Nation, dozens of foster children saved from poverty and addiction. The remarkable story that's inspiring America. Welcome back. Each year, more than 600,000 children spend time in America's foster care system. A new film called Sound of Hope, the story of Possum Trot, offers a window into their lives. Filmmakers hope the true story will inspire a movement to end our country's foster care crisis. CBN's Ephraim Graham has more.
Bennett Chapel is a small church in a small East Texas town called Possum Trot, with a miracle story now making a splash on the big screen in The Sound of Hope. This story begins with Bishop W.C. and Donna Martin, who began adopting troubled children from the foster care system in the 1990s, and then encouraged members of their church to do the same.
I'm thinking about adopting some kids. Reverend, look, I'm talking to him right now. Just come on over later, I'll fill you in. Bye.
Nika King plays First Lady.
I want people to know when you see me in this film, it's Nika King as the actor, but it's really First Lady Donna Martin.
So First Lady Donna Martin, I imagine you've seen the movie, you've seen her on set. Did you see yourself?
Oh, definitely. It's unexplainable that you take you see the structure of the both of us, right? But then when I'm looking at this film, I'm going, that is me. That is just me.
Yeah.
Sis, how you do that?
I don't know. God, because I prayed. Believe me, I prayed plenty of nights like, please, God, let me get this right. I don't want to mess this up. Please, God, come use my vessel, use my temple. I knew I had the chops, but there was still something special that needed to come upon me. And I think once we met and we had that Holy Ghost-filled interaction, I was like, okay, now the foundation is laid. Now I can move forward. I turned on the water and he just fell apart.
Demetrius Gross plays Bishop.
Demetrius, what are your thoughts upon reading the script?
So you read the script and you're immediately, the first portion of the first page, this is based on a true story. That always drops me in on a different level of commitment to the story. You're blown away, you're captivated, you're gripped, you feel compelled to participate in the superlative of this movie. You feel called, you feel changed when you watch it and when you read it, when you experience it.
Bishop, what's it like seeing your story on screen?
Unbelievable.
But if we can't wrap our arms around the most vulnerable amongst us, then what do we have? Noise! That's what we have. Noise.
I'm a preacher. I'm not an actor, so I don't know how those two connect together. But this is the thing that I see. God was in it, so God connected it together to be what it is.
And what it is a church that united to adopt nearly 80 children and for a time left no child on the town's waiting list in need of adoption.
22 families want to adopt. The whole town wants kids now.
That's about right.
Bishop, what's Bennett Chapel in Possum Trot like today?
Holy Ghost filled. That's the best that I can tell you, because if you come in that church, if you drive on those grounds out there, you're gonna feel the power.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Finally tonight, it's a night to remember. At the ballpark, when it took an unexpected turn, a player was baptized on the field right after the game. Minor league baseball player for the Nashville Sounds, Wes Clark, was baptized Saturday after winning against the Memphis Redbirds. Clark's teammates Brewer Hicklin baptized him in a large tub near home base. Both players changed out of their uniforms into Jesus Won t-shirts to mark the special occasion. Congratulations to him and his team. Beautiful story to end on. That's going to do it for us on Faith Nation. We'll see you tomorrow.